I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
We have become numb to this violence. Being shot at is not, I repeat, not part of our job.
Urgent calls to protect humanitarian workers after the bodies of first responders are found in a mass grave.
We want to once and for all dismantle that wall of hate in the Middle East.
Trying to find a path to peace amid rising regional tensions. A conversation with Egypt's ambassador. And designing more sustainable solutions for the clothing industry. Why so many fashions are going to waste. Next.
Essential supplies are running dangerously low in Gaza weeks into Israel's total blockade. The UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator is also demanding answers after Israeli forces killed 15 first responders in southern Gaza, including a UN staff member. Israel says troops opened fire on the group's vehicles because they were advancing suspiciously.
This case of our colleagues that were killed while trying to save lives is one horror in an endless parade from the past 2 weeks alone. We've had UN premises that have been shelled by tank fire, killing one of our colleagues and seriously injuring others. We've had international aid compounds and hospitals that have been hit. We've seen municipal workers that have been killed in humanitarian donated trucks. People have been bombed in food distribution points where aid workers have also been killed. Humanitarian warehouses have been damaged in strikes.
That's Jonathan Whitall, head of OCHA's Office for the Palestinian Territory. Gaza is becoming more dangerous for civilians and aid workers as Israel expands its military operations intending to seize large areas of the enclave. This week, the Security Council focused its attention on the dangers facing humanitarian aid workers in Gaza and elsewhere. Here's China's ambassador of Futong.
These harsh realities require the international community to enhance its sense of urgency, speak with a more unified voice, and to take stronger actions to protect humanitarian and UN personnel. We urge greater efforts to promote a ceasefire to end the fighting. Ending armed conflicts provides the most fundamental protection for humanitarian workers.
Shudija is monitoring developments inside the UN and has more on our top story. Disha.
Yes, Elaine. This week, without a doubt, the relentless attacks by the IDF on Gaza, especially the review of deaths of 15 humanitarian workers, dominated our agenda. On Wednesday, the Secretary General issued a statement once again expressing his deep alarm over the devastating human toll caused by the intensified hostility in Gaza.
He condemns the reported killing of over 1,000 people, including women and children, since the collapse of the ceasefire. Large-scale Israeli bombardments and ground operations have resulted in the widespread destruction and the displacement of over 100,000 Palestinians from Rafah in the last 2 days alone, most of them having already been displaced multiple times and having been displaced with very few belongings.
Regarding the humanitarian situation in Gaza, the UN strongly dismissed Israel's claim that there is enough food for long-term use, calling it ridiculous.
Israel says there's still enough food that was delivered to Gaza during the ceasefire. What is the UN's response to that?
As far as the UN is concerned, that's ridiculous. I mean, we are at the tail end of our supplies. Of the UN, of the supplies that came in through the humanitarian route. You know, WFP doesn't close its bakeries for fun. If there's no flour, if there's no cooking gas, the bakeries cannot open.
Is this accusation of Hamas possessing the aid from UN NGOs are false?
The UN has kept a chain of custody, and a very good chain of custody on all the aid on all the aid it's delivered.
Not only is food not entering Gaza, but as more evacuation orders are enforced, humanitarian operations are also facing increasing rejections from Israeli authorities. Is that normal?
Did they give you any reasons why there's an increasing denial of the operations inside Gaza?
And often, and this has been the case since the beginning of the war, those coordinated efforts are denied, impeded, or are blocked. So the increase is related to the expanding military operations on the ground and our increased need to coordinate in proximity to Israeli forces and the denials that are coming with that. And that is a problem. It shouldn't be the case.
This week, the Security Council held 2 meetings on Middle East, one emergency session on the situation in Gaza and another on the protection of civilians in conflicts. Assistant Secretary General Joyce Msuya briefed the Council, highlighting the severe challenges faced by humanitarian workers, not only in Gaza, but across the world.
Gaza is the most dangerous place for humanitarians ever. We extend our condolences to the families of the victims. We demand answers and call for justice. And since we are here today to discuss the protection of aid workers, I must ask this Council, what are you going to do to help us find those answers and achieve justice and avoid more killings?
Meanwhile, this April, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations is launching a new initiative, a call for peace, the end of wars, and respect for international law. Why is this initiative significant from a cultural perspective?
And what we wanted to create this new movement today that citizens around the world with different culture, different concerns, they have suffered, the disaster of war, and they have to gather together to tell the whole international community that they have to really call for this cry for peace and end of war and respect international law.
Well, and that's all from me. Elaine.
Shudeja, thanks.
The devastation is really alarming. Colleagues are reporting buildings turned to rubble, homes destroyed, and significant damage to roads and bridges and other infrastructure. Electricity supplies are still down in many places, and phone communication is patchy at best.
That's Melissa Lee Hein from the World Food Program. Myanmar is in urgent need of humanitarian aid after a major earthquake shook the country last week. OCHA says people are in desperate need of shelter, medical care, and clean water. Fighting between military forces and armed opposition groups is also complicating relief efforts. Let's take a look at some of the other issues on the UN's agenda.
Without concrete action, this current violence may well engulf the entire region, and the risks of such catastrophe are growing by the day.
UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada al-Nashif, highlighted growing concerns for human rights abuses amid the fighting in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The country also faces a food crisis, with 28 million people suffering from acute hunger. Armed gangs are extending their reach into more areas in Haiti, and violence is on the rise. Between July of 2024 and February of this year, more than 4,200 people were killed in the Caribbean nation. Pledges to make education more inclusive during the 2025 Global Disability Summit in Berlin. About 90% of developing countries have policies protecting education for persons with disabilities, but only a third of those countries have accessible schools.
Coming up.
We need to keep working together to restore peace and stability in the Middle East.
UN Insider.
Egypt is one of the founding members of the United Nations. The country has also played a role in efforts to bring the conflict between Israel and Hamas to an end and rebuild Gaza. I sat down with Egypt's ambassador to the UN, Osama Abdelhalik. Your country does so much with peacekeeping, with humanitarian issues. As the UN marks 80 years, what does the future of multilateralism look like given all that is happening today?
I would argue it continues to be a very promising future for the UN because look around. Do we have a substitute to the UN? Do we have another place that has the similar convening power of the UN? Do we have a place that can cover a lot of processes and so on? But having said that, I believe the UN itself needs to adapt to new realities, new emerging technologies, new challenges. And one would say with a lot of proudness that a lot of that is happening. You look to the Pact of the Future, you look to the open processes of the UN and so on, the way they try to adapt to new technologies, how they are accommodating the new trends like artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. It is happening. But of course, we need to keep reforming the way we do the business.
Pastor, a couple of numbers I want to put out here. The UN Secretary General has been concerned about the situation in Gaza. The UN estimates 70% of all structures in Gaza have been destroyed. And we know that your country recently presented a 5-year rebuilding plan for Gaza. What are you trying to do here at the UN as you try to garner more support?
The plan aims to reconstruct Gaza, to maintain Gaza as an integral part of the Palestinian state, the West Bank and Gaza, and East Jerusalem, to avail a space for the Palestinians to live normally, to live as each and other nation, each and other people around the globe and so on. They have the right to statehood. They have the right to independence. They have the right to end foreign occupation in that case, the Israeli occupation of their lands and so on. So this is, I would qualify as an Arab extended hand for peace. For peace, because we want to end all the atrocities. We want to once and for all dismantle that wall of hate in the Middle East. And there is an opportunity. Egypt is the founder of that peace camp in the Middle East. To draw the lessons from what has happened in that aggressive war against Palestinians in Gaza was a stark reminder to everyone that we need to keep working together to restore peace and stability in the Middle East.
And Ambassador, given your role in the region, your country's role in the region, and global diplomacy role, how important is reform at the UN Security Council? There's been talk about adding permanent seats representing the African continent for a very long time. What is your thought on where things stand now?
We're part and parcel, integral part of the so-called Isilvini consensus, the common African position on the UN reform. And yes, I would argue it is long overdue. We need to reform the Security Council. Given the nature of the different conflicts and so on, we needed a permanent African presence in the Security Council. And to be able for the Security Council to get out of that difficult territories of polarization and so on, we needed equality. We needed those new members to enjoy the veto right as well, so that when they are sitting there speaking on behalf of Africa and they're adding to the great job done by the current 3 African non-permanent members and so on, then Africa will have a voice. Will have a voice, but not only Africa. Arabs merits having a permanent presence in this, a permanent seat in the Security Council with all privileges, including the veto. And we want to preserve the integrity of the organization, the integrity of the Security Council as it caters to fulfill its duty or so. and we need to keep working with the permanent member, but of course to reform the working methods. Reform is not only about the veto or the number of countries or who would qualify. It's about as well the working methods, more transparency, uh, uh, um, get the Security Council closer to realities, reform the way we're doing the peacekeeping, and so on, reform the way we're doing the agenda. We're picking the briefers so that, we would have a balance, diversify the outputs.
Ambassador, is there any message that you'd like to share with our international audience?
My message would be a message of hope for the younger generation and so on, to keep working hard, to keep advancing the cause of peace and the cause of finding a commonality. Peaceful coexistence is the best way to guarantee peace around the world and so on. We need to work together globally in a much better way than we're doing as we speak. And that necessitates wisdom from all the parties, all the countries, and to keep digging for equality and for human dignity for all. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Coming up,
people started importing secondhand clothing, and they started selling what they wanted to sell and dumping in the desert what they didn't want to sell.
UN Insider.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
Each year, the textile industry produces an estimated 2 to 8% of global greenhouse emissions. It uses 215 trillion liters of water. That's enough to fill 86 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. A special display on the grounds of UN headquarters spotlights the need for more sustainable practices in the fashion and textile industry. March 30th marked the International Day of Zero Waste, thanks in part to a resolution introduced by Turkey more than 2 years ago, then adopted by the General Assembly. Globally, enough textile waste is generated to fill a garbage truck every second. Clothing waste contributes to a problem that has transformed part of a Chilean desert into a fashion graveyard.
The Atacama Desert in northern Chile is one of the most wondrous sights in the southern hemisphere. Huge expanses of sand and rock formations sit under brilliant blue skies. Day or night, it offers one of nature's most spectacular vistas. But there is a blight on the desert on the outskirts of the city of Iquique. 35,000 tons of discarded dirty clothes. And the pile is just getting bigger. Most of the clothes are unsold secondhand items that are imported into the country in huge pacas, or bales of discarded clothing imported to Chile from Asia, Turkey, Europe, and the United States. Old t-shirts and jeans, beaten up sneakers, a lady's sandal, tons and tons of clothes, once shiny and new, now sitting under the hot desert sun. The used clothing enters the country through a free trade zone in Iquique, meaning no import duties are paid. It is then sold in open-air markets around the country. But there is so much of it left over that every year this pile of used clothes in the desert grows by the ton.
Verdes, rosados. Y al principio teníamos 8 colores.
Rosaria Evia is a fashion recycler and activist.
We're importing around, yearly, 59,000 tons. Out of that, they estimate that 20,000 tons are sold in the secondhand market. So we have an economy here. It's really good for us because people, they buy clothing in fardos. I don't know what's the name in English. They buy clothing and they resell it, making clothing more accessible for people that have less purchasing power. But the problem is that they import much more than what they sell, and what they don't sell, they end up dumping in the desert.
Chile's lax import laws and no duties on items shipped to the free trade zone around Iquique allow the arrival of bale after bale of used clothing. Activists say the developed world is using Chile as a dumping ground for its discarded clothing.
I think it's the lack of traceability and of, I don't know if law enforcement is the word, but basically people started importing secondhand clothing and they started selling what they wanted to sell and dumping in the desert what they didn't want to sell. And since other countries in the world started to putting like import policies and forbidding secondhand clothing to enter their countries, more and more clothing were circling the world, and it ended up coming here in Chile because we didn't have any like import policy that forbid people to import more than what they sell.
The dump keeps getting bigger and bigger, and environmentalists are concerned not only the blight of the landscape, but also the possibility of toxic fumes emanating from items that contain plastic fibers as they sit in the sun for months on end. But even though tons of used clothes are sold and resold in Iquique and around the country, the sheer volume of discarded items shipped into the country makes their long-term disposal a bigger problem. Patricio Ferreira is the mayor of Alto Hospicio, a suburb of Iquique that hosts the huge dump of used clothing.
Without a doubt, this has become a tremendous problem for us here. It started with the best of intentions and became something quite bad, particularly for the environment. We now have contaminated soils that are the product of this trash. Trash that belongs to the rest of the world and that was brought here through the free trade zone that allows this type of importations. The original idea had good intentions. To allow people access to purchasing good second-hand clothing. But that ended up growing into something much bigger that is outside of the law. We are now importing tons of rubbish, and that has become something negative for us.
Importers see things differently. They say they're recycling items that would otherwise simply be waste. But activists say solutions are twofold. The government has to create ways to prevent the massive influx of used clothes. And people have to change their buying habits when it comes to cheap disposable clothing.
The thing is, the amount of clothes we import, and that we have to legislate how much you import. So you can have quotas, so you can only import as much as you sold last year, for instance, or you can import freely, but you have to have the traceability that everything that you imported, you sold, or if you didn't sell, you have in storage, but not dumped in the desert. So that's one thing. But the other problem we have here is we have like a massive overconsumption. So people, they buy more and more because of this phenomena, the fast fashion industry, whatever, and then they don't know what to do with their clothing. So that's a different problem. So first, the import thing, like regulate it. And the other thing, we have to educate. We have to educate people. Like if you're going to buy, you're responsible for your items. We get the clothing and we reuse what is in good shape. What is not in good shape, we try to transform in other products, and only the textile that is really in ill condition, we then recycle it. So for people that doesn't know our process, what we do is we select hand by hand, item by item. We select it for the color, and after that we cut it, we shred it, and then we turn it back to yarn. The problem is that the process is expensive. So it's not something really cheap. So we need willingness to pay. So either you're willing to pay for your recycling or you're willing to pay for the yarn. But people nowadays, they're so like, they have this weird conception that throwing their garbage away should be free. And it's like, so a lot of companies contact us, like, I want to be sustainable, so I want to give you my old clothing, so for you to take care of it. I go, okay, that has a cost, so this is what I will charge you for the service. Oh, really? I thought it was free because I'm giving you your raw material. And I go like, it doesn't work like that. This is a service.
Experts say initiatives like recycling, transforming discarded clothes into new items, or offering clothes for resale are on the right track. It is the right idea, but they seem like drops in a bucket compared to the sheer amount of clothes that end up in the desert, something that will only change if people's habits and relationship to the environment change as well.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is a special edition of UN Insider.
UN Insider serves as an important window for the global audience to better understand multilateral diplomacy.
It's very important for the media to cover the United Nations, to seek to understand and tell the story in ways that the average person in the street can understand.
I think it's very important that the media should contribute to conveying important messages about the reality of today's challenges.
UN Insider has come to the UN, and we at the UN are so grateful to have it here. It is the only dedicated TV program to what is happening in the UN, and it is reaching so many people with, as it says in its title, inside the UN stories.
Media plays an important role in providing objective information across the world.
We think that media has a strong power of uplifting, what we are trying to convey as messages as developing countries.
We need the mobilization of all peoples, of whole government and whole of society, and media can help us to be informed so that we also can make our part.
I think the media is fundamental to enable citizens across the world, first of all, to understand what is the rationale of having the United Nations. It's not that there is one place on planet Earth that will tell the rest of the world what to do. It is a much more complex story.